correctly with the correct amount.
D20 Radio, where gamers roll.
www.d20radio.com.
Welcome to Me and Steve Talk RPGs, a podcast where me and my friend Steve try and help you get the most out of your role-playing game experience.
Welcome back to Me and Steve Talk RPGs. It's me and my friend Steve.
Hello.
And we're talking RPGs today. And what is up, Gamer Nation? So, to kick things off, we didn't talk about what podcast we're talking for the week.
That's okay. I would had one in mind if you don't mind me just riffing.
Nope, go ahead.
All right. So this week's D20 podcast of the week is going to be, for a number of reasons, the Miskatonic University podcast, which is the D20's network's home for all things Call of Cthulhu and weird and horrifying, essentially. They're a bunch of really cool people. Keeper Dave, Keeper Murph, I believe Keeper John just stepped away from the podcast, but he still hangs around the Discord a lot. But it's a really cool community. You know, they're into Call of Cthulhu and Alien and Vaesen and all kinds of Troika, you know, all kinds of just kind of, they do tend toward more horror games, but they like a lot of just weird stuff too. So if you want to check them out, that's the Miskatonic University podcast, and as always, we'll link them in the show notes.
Yeah, and honestly, Miskatonic University, one of my favorite places to go steal ideas from.
Yes. I was listening to an episode not too long ago, and I got an idea for something I want to do in either Call of Cthulhu or Delta Green, which may just make it into the show later tonight.
Well, yeah, what we're going to get into is, as per listener request, we will be talking about the weirdest game ideas. So this is an example of why you need to be in our Discord, because here's what happened. About 10 minutes before we started recording the show, I put up a message in our Discord about, what do you want to talk about? And I put in that it will explode in 10 minutes. It will disappear. We did have one of our listeners type up, say, hey, we want to hear you talk about the weirdest game ideas. All right, cool. I then deleted the message that stated that I was going to, we were looking for listener ideas. So you need to be in our Discord so you know when I'm in there going, hey, we don't know what to talk about for this week, so we need an idea.
All this because I asked Steve 3 days ago, what are we going to talk about this week?
And I said, I'll get back to you. And that perfectly describes my life right now.
Well, you know what? I mean, it's one of those things, though. Sometimes it's like you've got ideas, but it's like, sometimes you just don't want to do something deep.
No. And sometimes I just want to know what you guys want to hear about, because, I can sit here and we can sit here and talk to ourselves all day long. But the fact of the matter is that I just want to know what you want to talk about. What do you want to hear us talk about? Seriously, come into our Discord. Tell us what you like. Tell us what you don't like. Tell us that you don't like our face. I don't care.
There's a reason I chose to do an audio podcast.
I know I have a face for radio. It's great. So anyways, weirdest game ideas. Do you want to kick things off? Do you have a weird game idea? Or let me put it this way. Let me rephrase it a little bit. What's a game that you think has a weird starting concept?
The first one that comes to mind, and I'm basing this solely on the one playthrough I've heard of it, and I know absolutely nothing about the game itself, but would be Troika.
Fair enough. Troika does have a bit of a odd, weird concept to it. I'll say mine.
Go ahead.
I think mine is probably going to be Slay Industries.
I get that.
It's not a super hard concept to get your head around, but it is weird and alien in a lot of ways.
Well, and you have the original book, so you'll know what I'm talking about, but Mr. Slayer is vaguely reminiscent of like an angry Michael Jackson.
Yeah.
With no nose, which ironically happened long after the book was published. But anyway.
Yeah, and the base concept of Slay Industries, where it's like either kill or be killed, but you're doing it for the views and the ratings. Like, that is so weird and cool and twisted in just all the right ways.
Yeah, kind of a, well, early 90s Britain. I think the actual game came out of Scotland. And in a way, I think probably on some level drew a little inspiration from like Running Man.
Yeah, Running Man and other ideas, but still the art for it and the world that they've built around it, this weird alien, like it is really if like an Iron Maiden album cover became a world.
In a lot of ways, I'll give you that.
I really look at it and go like if Iron Maiden album covers became like an RPG, it would probably become Slay Industries.
That's fair. Yeah, I can see
I
that.
can hear the cogs in your brain turning. Like, I hadn't
You know what?
thought about it like that.
I haven't read it, but Keyforge is weird.
Keyforge is weird. Keyforge has some really cool ideas. I touched the game for all of like 2 seconds, and I haven't actually touched the Genesis book for it. I know the actual game itself was really good. And it had some interesting, like, if you're into sword and sorcery, it was an interesting take on that. Not maybe my cup of tea, but hey, everybody's got their own thing. That's a cool twist on sword and sorcery stuff.
I played a game of it or something with a mutual friend of ours who had a couple of decks of it. But yeah, it's just different.
It kind of gives me like a little bit of maybe a goofier Eberron vibe.
Fair.
Like with the world setting and everything, it's not quite as dark and noir. It's a little bit more like a little more He-Man and a little less like noir.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. Weird is such a strange thing to define, though. I mean, and I think maybe because I do like weird things in my RPGs. That is kind of a draw for me. For lack of, to me, that's, I've said it before. To me, Call of Cthulhu, well, it is a horror game. It is a game about weird stuff. And so, to a certain point, I'm of the opinion that unless you're a purist, Call of Cthulhu doesn't need to be run necessarily per the lore to have fun with it. It can just be about weird stuff happening and you're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, Call of Cthulhu or, Delta Green is sort of the same way.
Yeah, it is. Call of Cthulhu, because I think of the nature of the PCs, maybe lends itself to a little less serious take, a little easier, where your PCs in Delta Green typically would be agents or more hardened individuals, where in Call of Cthulhu they could be just literally anything. Not that you couldn't adapt Delta Green to do that, but wow, weird.
Yeah, I just had one hit me that we talked about. I picked as Game of the Week for a while ago. Invisible Sun.
I was just thinking of that.
Invisible Sun has, like, I don't know about the game itself, obviously, because I haven't really touched it. But Invisible Sun, when you want to talk about weird, it's weird, man.
Well, yeah, the artwork is very
weird in itself. Like,
yeah.
Dark Sun, the D&D setting, is a weird game. Like, what if...
See, I like it.
I like Dark Sun too, but it's sort of like, what if Mad Max but Dungeons and Dragons?
Yeah. Well, Dark Sun is one of those settings too, though. I hear a lot of people who normally proclaim their disdain for D&D go, except for Dark Sun. If they made Dark Sun, I'd buy it for 5e.
I think because it's sort of like our taste for Eberron. It brings this really nice, really different twist to it. It's sort of got that, like, Conan the Barbarian vibe, very much. Conan had a lot of the same feelings that Dark Sun brings, is that raw, just the scorching, bright desert and the way the characters are dressed. And a lot of the art around Dark Sun brings a lot of that, like Conan the Barbarian, or, like I said, what if Mad Max but Dungeons and Dragons, stuff like that. Like,
yeah.
And it's so alien, where Dungeons and Dragons isn't that alien. Like, yes and no, but it's not, like, there are a lot of things in Dark Sun that are really weird. You know what I mean?
I think Dark Sun just breaks all, or maybe not all, but so many of the common fantasy tropes. And then also, going back to when it was being published in second edition, it mechanically was moderately different from the rest of D&D. I mean, I know your strength score, I believe all your attributes went up higher. They really did some things from a mechanical standpoint that were not the same as the rest of the game.
Well, I think Dark Sun was one of those things where it was about maybe 1 or 2 iterations from being not Dungeons and Dragons, not being an actual D&D module and just being its own RPG. And I wonder if it would have done better as its own RPG. Even saying with the monolith that is Dungeons and Dragons, Dark Sun doesn't have any love from the mainstream because it didn't really take off, because it did change Dungeons and Dragons in these ways. And that's not me saying that, oh, we're underground or anything like that, but you have to acknowledge that we're not huge D&D fans and we like the weirder RPGs, and because of that, we are in sort of a elite few. You know what I mean?
Yeah, well, at least a few.
Yeah.
No, that was actually the first D&D I ever played was Dark Sun. So I mean, for me, it's kind of got a nostalgic thing to it, and they did apparently release some stuff for it in 4th edition, but I think that may well have been kind of the last thing that TSR really made, so to speak, new for D&D before they got bought up.
Yeah, but there's weird games, and then there's weird game concepts. And I think you have a couple weird game concepts. I have a couple weird game concepts. And honestly, I want to talk to some people about one I really have been toying around with, and I don't know how it would work, and I don't want to make a bunch of people mad. I want to run a vampire game, and not necessarily Vampire the Masquerade. I might have to find a different system to run this vampire game. I told you about this a while ago. I want to run a vampire game in sort of a post-apocalyptic world where humans are almost extinct.
Mm-hmm.
And so vampires are so if you're playing a vampire, you're trying to find your next meal and, take care of anything that might be your next meal. And if you're playing a human, you are trying to not be the next meal. And I kind of want to see if I can find either I run it in Vampire the Masquerade or I run it in something else, but I want to try and find a system to run that in, and I don't know what the best system for that be.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. I have wondered, just because it is very much a post-apocalyptic thing, and it's free. It's something, I think you actually brought it up at Game of the Week way back in like one of the single-digit episodes called Atomic Highways.
I thought about that too. Atomic Highways I was thinking a little bit less vehicular movement, but that's one of the big strengths of Atomic Highways is that it's got a really good vehicular stuff in it. And that's one of the things that I was actually reading about it and really liking. But maybe, I don't know. I need to do a little bit. This isn't a full-fledged idea as of yet, but it is definitely something that I like the idea. I've been toying around with it, and I need to actually get it flushed out before I can commit to anything as far as it being an actual game.
That's fair. Well, I have one, and this was actually what I mentioned earlier. It was inspired by hearing something on the Miskatonic University podcast. And one of the things they do every now and then is they go through some of these old classic Call of Cthulhu scenarios that, I mean, there are just so many of them out there, and they're put out in various compilations and anthologies, and they're all over the place if you look for them. But there's this one, and it's called The Code, and it's this weird thing about this, like, almost like a dive suit type thing or whatever, that's a time machine, but you have to have the code to make it work right. And there's a whole thing about the setup of how you get the players there and everything else. But the idea of this suit as a time machine, and my brain went, okay, so again, this isn't a purist Call of Cthulhu idea, but what if you mix this concept with Back to the Future?
That could be fun.
And so now, I mean, you could literally have this suit be the DeLorean. Or if you didn't want to do it that way, you could even, and you still wanted to play, we'll say, 1950s, you could have it be this old hot rod like Willie's Coupe or something like that. But, very much kind of take this adventure and turn it into a Call of Cthulhu tribute to Back to the Future.
Yeah, it could be neat.
Hey, I have an idea
Yeah.
for a game.
What do you got?
Let's have an idea about losing, or a game about losing ideas and having to go find them.
Oh man, all right. So speaking of that got me back on track. Well, not necessarily back on track, but on a different track. So uh, paranoia.
Tracks have been found.
Tracks have been found. I don't know it's the same ones, but I don't know. They're going in a direction. Paranoia is a weird game.
Yeah.
Paranoia is a game, and everything I've seen of Paranoia is all about like a lot of the actual story around Paranoia is pretty awesome. You live on essentially like a prison planet, or a lot of the stories I've heard is people live on a prison planet and your whole goal is to not break the rules, but no matter what you do, you're going to break the rules. So it's all about Big Brother's watching you and watching what you're doing and how much worse things can get. Paranoia is a really cool game, man. I've talked about it before, and I've talked about how I'd like to play it, and I really would like to play it because I think it could be a lot of fun. Because some of the most fun stuff is where you have players that are trying to hide things from one another, but they're trying to hide things that are becoming increasingly obvious. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think that could be a really cool, fun game. And I think Paranoia as a world has a really cool idea. I think one of the... you had I'm going to steal yours. You had a cool idea.
Okay.
You had suggested, and I don't know what system you suggested you play it in, where everybody rolls up a character, and then... Or maybe it wasn't you. I want to say it was... I don't know. I want to say it was maybe you. Everybody rolls up a character, and then passes their character sheet to the left.
Okay, I know the idea of mine that you're thinking of,
Okay,
but you're
yes.
going in a different direction with it.
All right, so go with yours, because my idea is just that everybody rolls up a character and then passes it to the left and watches your neighbor react to the character that you just made. But you don't tell the table beforehand. You just let them make their characters.
That could be amusing too. No, my idea, and this actually, there's also a game that would kind of work for this, is that I brought up in Game of the Week, I don't know, a month or two ago, called Wield. But my idea was that, and you can do this with D&D or pretty much any game that would, in some form or other, have sentient magic weapons. You have people make their characters, and then you have them make their character a sentient magic weapon. And then once they've created said magic weapon, you give the magic weapon to your neighbor at the table. So your neighbor is playing your weapon.
There it is. That was the idea that I was trying to remember. I'm like, you had a cool idea, and I can't remember what it was.
But, obviously, like I said, you don't tell them about that prior till, okay, now hand that sheet to your buddy.
Yeah. Like I said, I think that could be fun with even with just a fun, like, D&D one-shot of everybody rolls up a character. All right, now pass it to the left. Wait, what? But...
You could even do the same thing, like if you have, call it like familiars or, animal companions or something like that.
Yeah.
Or what do they call it? Like a minion or a sidekick, whatever, where, so to speak, yeah, you're technically playing two characters, but it's just a way to, like, mess with the person next to you in a good-natured way, because everyone's going to do, the whole table's going to be doing it to each other.
Yeah, I think a game with some, I enjoy serious games. I do. But sometimes you just got to have fun in a good-natured way, and you just got to relax. And sometimes that means doing something a little bit goofier than what you would normally.
Yeah.
Maybe you really enjoy the super serious games, but take a break from them once in a while and enjoy something that's not super serious. Like, let's enjoy a game that's just us goofing around for a couple hours. You know what I mean? Like,
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I like games. I like to play games that are serious and have serious tones and get, this is the grimdark part. But that's why I enjoy when we get to a point where our characters can finally breathe and relax. That's why I'm always like, oh, good. Okay, we're at this point where the character that I'm playing can finally, like, I can take a step back. I don't have to be super serious at this point in time. I can relax as a character, and not necessarily relax per se as in, like, maybe there's some kind of shenanigans going on, but I mean, like, not everything has to be the world-ending problem. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's fun to just not have to deal with the world ending, and you just want to deal with like petty crime for a little bit. You know what I
Yeah. No,
mean?
you're actually. I was going to say keep going. You gave me an idea though. I'm trying to find something.
Oh, okay. Um, I had heard an idea for a one shot for D&D, which we've talked about D&D a lot, and for one shots, and every now and again, if you have a group of players that know how to play that and you have everything ready to go, you just do it. I like the idea of like I heard a one shot that was basically everybody rolls up characters and they run into like a lich or some sort of super powerful being that turns all the characters into goblins, and now they have to go into the city and steal an item to get them back out, or to get their character sheets back, and just something silly like that I think could be a lot of fun. And it's not super super silly, but it is a fun goofy character concept. It's a fun goofy game.
Yeah. Now, the idea that came to me was there's a one-page RPG out there that I know you've heard of called Everyone is John.
Yes.
And for those who haven't heard of it, there's a one page out there that's free. It's actually public domain, I believe, or whatever the appropriate thing. But the premise of this is everybody plays a different aspect of this character's psyche, and then you bid for control of the body. And so it can go really crazy. And I've heard it played a couple of times, various ways. But there's also a version of it that's a bit expanded, that's on drive-through from Gamer Nation Studios, and one of the people involved was GM Chris from Order 66 and the Forge, and
GM Chris.
he's everywhere.
GM Chris.
But yeah, I mean, there's a PDF of it. I just found it on drive-through for $6.
Yeah. And if you're thinking, why would I pay for a PDF of this game? No, you got to understand. They took a one-page RPG and turned it into what? 48 pages?
64.
64.
According to the
Yeah. Yeah, we took a one-page RPG, turned it into 64 pages. It is worth $6. I have a copy of this. It's worth $6. I love that game because it reminds me of... Have you ever heard of the movie Being John Malkovich?
Yes, although I've never actually watched it.
Okay, the idea of Being John Malkovich is basically this guy finds a like cubby hole in his office that leads into John Malkovich's head, the actor John Malkovich. And so like they get to basically like run around, see what John Malkovich sees. He can hear the people in his head. Like it's weird, and when I was younger I didn't get it and I didn't like the movie, but now I acknowledge it because it is sort of a genius, like weird funny movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what Everybody is John reminds me of Being John Malkovich.
It could very well have been the original inspiration. Who knows?
It could have been. It's just one of those things where it just reminds me of that, and I'm like, ooh, that's a fun movie, and that's a game concept that, man, I want to get that played at some point.
Yeah, I mean, if you really want to get into weird stuff, I mean, there's the one-page stuff has got to be full of just, I mean, there's Trash Pandas, which is, at least, again, I've not even gone to look for it, but the one time I heard it played was actually on Critical Role, and they were a bunch of basically gearhead raccoons, etc., street racing in Los Angeles. And, I mean, you put that crew to that concept, and it was a riot.
Yeah,
especially because that was the one Sam ran.
Oh, geez. I'll have to look that up. I'll have to try and listen to that because... Anyways, there's just a ton of... Like, that's a very, very dense topic of weird RPGs because you could go in a lot of directions with that.
Oh, yeah.
And what I might find weird, you might not find weird. You know what I mean? And that's another thing where it's like, oh, what's a weird game? Okay, well, this is weird to me. Well, that's not that... Well, that's kind of weird, but I don't know. I would think more along the lines of this. Like...
Yeah, like when you brought up Slay, to me, it's a post-apocalyptic kind of ish sci-fi cyberpunk turned up to 11.
Yeah.
To me, I don't see it as weird, but I understand where you're coming from. Then again, you have the whole concept of the weird war settings, be it World War I or World War II, and adding weird stuff like the never going home that you brought up a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, or Deadlands. Deadlands is a
Yeah.
weird setting. What if Wild West, but Call of Cthulhu, or what if Wild West but Magic?
Well, I was going to say there are a couple versions of there's Deadlands Reloaded, I think, which is bringing it up to kind of a Mad Maxy version of Deadlands, I think.
Yeah, and that could be fun. Again, going back to sort of Dark Sun, or that idea of like Mad Max with magic, that would be neat. Morkborg is a really dark, really weird game, but it's super popular, and I'm glad that it's super popular. It's amazing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I think that's weird in the concept that your characters are effectively disposable, and that's part of the premise of the game.
Well, that and the world is weird. The world is dark and twisted and weird.
Mm-hmm.
I can't get into a lot of it because it's sort of over our rating, but the world is that, like, it's dark, it's twisted, it's a weird world that the characters live in, and just because they're disposable, like, that says a little bit more about why, what makes that world weird. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, weird like is kind of subjective, but I mean, like, but then you get to, like, weird character concepts. Like I always said, and for those who aren't familiar with the older versions of D&D, specifically second edition, you'll be like, what the heck are you talking about? But I think you'll understand this, Steve. And I always said at one point I really wanted to play a halfling who thought he was a paladin.
Oh man. Oh.
Like, was completely convinced that he was a paladin, but was just a fighter.
You know what the sad part is if you'd have played that, by the end of that campaign, he would have been a paladin. He would have actually been a paladin. I would have just been quietly like, you believe this hard enough. This is starting to work.
Or, stuff like that. Or, I always...
Well, to talk about D&D, grave clerics.
Yeah. They're kind of weird.
They are weird. They're a bit weird. It's like, it's not an anti-cleric, which is like, an anti-cleric is like, oh, well, clerics are typically good and holy. I'm the reverse of that. A grave cleric is more of like, I'm just sort of not about living. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah, well, that ties into the Raven Queen, though, which is a little weird in its own way, because she's really not concerned with whether things live or die. She's in charge of that process.
Yeah.
Which is a bit weird, I suppose.
It's a weird take. So.
Yeah. Yeah, and then you get into sci-fi weird, and there where can't you go?
Yeah, exactly. Where can't you go in sci-fi that's weird? I don't know. There's a lot of just... Weird is a fun concept, and it's something that I think if you don't have weird in your story, you're sort of lacking, and in my opinion.
That's fair. I think you need a certain amount of weird because it translates to unknown.
Yes. And the unknown is what keeps people involved.
Yeah. Yeah. Or the desire to know the unknown.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's... Wow. Another kind of a weird concept that I had, and you'd have to know the Palladium system a little bit, the Rifts engine specifically, but, okay, Rifts in the core book has rules for people to play as a hatchling dragon. Now, mind you, they start with, like, I want to say 400 MDC, which, to put that in human terms, is roughly 4,000 hit points. Okay. Plus they get magic, and they're crazy strong, and then, as they get older, they only get worse. So I always joked, that I would let someone play a hatchling dragon as long as they played them as being deathly afraid of being involved in any sort of combat. And I have a friend, or had a friend in college, and in contact with him to this day, who begged me to let him play that character concept.
I like it. So I would have actually taken that a little bit of a different direction. But I like the fact that you were like, no, you have to be like deathly afraid of going into combat. I think the direction I would have taken that is when you do magic, I get to pick what magic comes out. Sort of like there was I don't believe it's true. They used to say that like baby snakes were always the most dangerous because they couldn't control how much venom went into their bites. Sort of that idea of like, you could be super dangerous, but you don't know. You don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah. You know, I like, I mean, like I said, sci-fi, the options for weird are just, I mean, they're literally limited only by your imagination. You know, you could, any sort of world setting, anything. And I keep seeing Torg come up in my brain. And I know that was it's kind of a weird sci-fi game, typically, I believe. I'm not 100% certain.
I don't know Torg.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I've never actually, like, seen it.
Oh,
But
I've seen Torg. Okay. Yes, I've seen Torg. I had to look it up to be like, what is Torg? Torg is the one that has, yeah, that's a weird sci-fi game, weird fantasy game almost. Could be fun. I don't know anything about it.
Yeah, I don't either. I mean, it is what it is, though. You know, but yeah, sci-fi. I mean, you could play a game where the humans are the invaders.
Yeah.
Um.
Ooh, I got one that's not sci-fi. Mouse Guard, or
Kind of.
any
Yeah.
of the like Underdark stuff where you're playing creatures that are tiny.
Yeah. Root,
Yeah.
the RPG. But yeah, there's so much, and I mean, then you get into you've got, I mean, urban fantasy is a big genre right there, and that opens up a ton of weird, to be able to play with. Gosh, your game of the week that just the episode or two ago, Paranormal Affairs Canada. By the very definition, it's about weird.
Yeah. Yeah, anything to do with like cryptozoology stuff, that's weird.
Yes. Now idea just came back to me.
Okay, good. Glad. Glad I could help you with that big word that I know.
No, I had the idea of, okay, so there's a number of different titles out there that would deal with basically monster hunters or cryptozoology hunters, people hunting Bigfoot or whatever. But what about if you played a game that was like that, except you played Bigfoot trying to avoid the hunters?
Oh, that could be fun.
Or any sort of, somewhat, kind of like, I guess to a certain point that's part of what like Vampire the Masquerade is trying to appear human, but you know what I mean? Like,
yeah, that could be fun.
But the idea of, you play Bigfoot and you have to get away from the hunters, but you have to try and do it in a way that, like you can't leave evidence, but you want to mess with them. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Well, so I think with that, let's get into some weird games that we would recommend for maybe Game of the Week.
Okay, Game of the Week.
Game of the week. Game of the week.
So I'll kick things off because I just learned this exists and I'm super excited that it exists and I'm very excited to talk about it. So I learned today, and I knew that there was one out there, I just didn't know that Russ Morrissey had a part in it. The Judge Dredd and the Worlds of 2000 AD tabletop game. Sign me up. I'm in. I'm sold. I like 2000 AD. You want to talk about a world that's got a weird setting? That system or that world is awesome and British and weird in all of the right ways. And Judge Dredd especially, like it's not, Judge Dredd's one of those things that's been done wrong in the past, but Judge Dredd in 2000 AD is dark and gritty and grimy, and There was a movie that came out a couple years ago with Carl Urban called Dredd. It was really good. It was sort of getting close to what Judge Dredd actually is, but it wasn't quite there. But Judge Dredd is just super dark and super awesome, and I'm excited. I'm going to get my hands on that. It's on DriveThruRPG for the PDF for like $20. I'm getting my hands on that sooner rather than later because that is so cool, man.
And I do know, because I didn't realize you weren't aware of it, I have a quick start that's on there, is free or pay what you want. I know it's there.
Yeah, I'll pick it up too probably, but I'm definitely going to get the full game because that's just I knew there was a Judge Dredd game. I just didn't know that Russ Morrissey was part of it, and because they are attached to that, that sold me on it because I've never seen a bad product of theirs. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, it uses his what's old is new system, which I've read a little bit of it. I picked up the kind of generic PDFs he has of it. He has three. He has the old, which is more of a fantasy, modern, and then a sci-fi version of it. Anyway, I know there's three. I think there's fantasy, modern, and future. But in any case, I picked it up, and it appears, I read a little bit of it. It appears very much to be kind of very much a love letter to the old West End, now Open D6 system, although not, it has been modified, added to, enhanced, if you will.
Not a problem at all because I sort of like that West End old school Star Wars system. So
Yeah, and I know there's a bunch of supplements out for it too, like
yeah,
some adventure paths and some stuff like that.
I was noticing that as I was poking around that there's a bunch of supplements and stuff. And so that's my game of the week. What do you got, Steve?
Well, in the spirit of weird, have you heard of Santa Vaca?
No.
So I'm not even sure if this is a game, to be completely honest.
This is a good start. It's a good start to things.
Well, the full title is Santa Vaca, a hack of the world's most popular RPG. What this is game designer John Wick, known from like Seventh Sea and so forth, basically opened up the Dungeons & Dragons SRD and went, okay, what can I change around, turn upside down, and just do different things with?
Okay.
And so what this is effectively taking all the things that were, if you will, the sacred cows of D&D and doing something else with them. He's saying it's got a whole new system to use the standard D20, new way to use abilities, new ways to use alignment, new way to use armor class, hit points, pretty much anything on a character sheet. An alternate system using D6s instead of D20. 2 new magic systems. All this in 80 pages. And it's only $6 for the PDF.
Yeah, that's going on the short list because I might be able to, I don't know, maybe at some point just throw that down at the table that we play at once a month that is just strictly D&D. They might actually give that a try because it's just D&D. Here, it's a weird D&D homebrew thing, and they might actually buy that.
Yeah, like I said, I don't know, if for no other reason than, like you said, there are those tables out there that they only want to do D&D, and so, hey, it's a way to do something different, which is kind of the whole point, To me,
Yeah.
Role-playing games have always been, the thing about them that I like so much is that your only limit is your imagination.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, there's actually a quote on the listing for this Santa Vaca. And it says, this is apparently a quote from Wick, and it says, for some reason or another, I was thinking, could I change D&D without changing the character sheet? After a short while, I said, yeah, I could.
Very cool. Well, on that note, let's go ahead and shout out. You can find us on Facebook, Twitter, Discord, again, still soon coming TikTok, Facebook at Me and Steve RPGs, or Me and Steve RPG podcast, Twitter at and RPGs, Discord at Me and Steve RPGs.
Yeah, links for that's all in the show notes.
Yep, links for all that in the show notes. We have some very cool stuff coming up and some very cool stuff coming out, so keep an eye out for that. big things coming this summer. We're making plans for this summer.
Yes.
Just want to say that now and get that out there. Actual plays eventually coming back. Go ahead, sir.
I was saying, by the time anyone hears this, Bad Batch will be out.
Yes, Bad Batch will be out by the time anyone hears this. Just to tag on a little bit at the end here. You know what's a fun movie? It's not amazing, but it's a fun movie if you're into R-rated action movies. Mortal Kombat came out over the weekend, and it was really good because it was just Mortal Kombat.
I heard some talk about that.
Yeah, it's. I don't know if what you've heard has been positive, but I really liked it.
Okay. What I've heard is kind of just mixed, but that it's Mortal Kombat and,
Yeah.
Oh, that's the other... Yeah, we were talking about weird stuff, and it was in my head, and then it left, and now it's back. What the heck was that name of that Peter Jackson movie from a couple years ago with the city... Mortal Engines?
Mortal Engines. Yeah, that's a weird... You could pull... that would make a really good Atomic Highways game.
I have yet to see it. I saw the previews and I was like, ooh.
Yeah.
But I always forget to look for it to see if it's on like any of the streaming services or anything.
I haven't looked for it recently. I know when it came out, everybody was like, this would have been really cool if not for X, Y, and Z. And I was sort of bummed because X, Y, and Z were like, oh man, I wish you wouldn't have said that. You know what I mean?
Well, but like, to me, that's a game that... Because like I saw the trailers and I went, ooh. There's gaming fodder there.
Yeah, and I think that's a whole, like, again, I think we've had the discussion before about stealing ideas, but that's a whole thing. We could have another whole topic on stealing ideas.
Yeah.
But we do want to remind you to get out there and play some RPGs and be kind to one another.
Yep.
Intro and outro music by the band 12 Noon. You can email us at meandsteverpg@gmail.com. You can also find us at facebook.com/meandsteverpg. Thank you and be kind to each other.
How much for the cigar?
Cigar, $20, dog. You gotta go down the street to the store and buy that.
Thanks, Jesse.